Coming to you from the Deep South, this is the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast. High impact leadership is not reserved for leaders, and it has nothing to do with your position, title, or rank. However, it does have everything to do with your character. It's time to climb to the next level and beyond, personally and professionally. Now, let's start making it happen with your host, Mac Story.
Small deeds done are better than great deeds planned. Those are the words from Peter Marshall. As we kick off Trait 9, Be Intentional, in this 30-part series on my book, Blue Collar Leadership and Teamwork, 30 Traits of High Impact Players. So thanks for joining me today on the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast as we dive into this content. Now, I know a lot of you around the country are doing book studies on this book right now. I know many of you are doing book studies on other books. So if you and your organization are making it happen through book studies, I really appreciate it, because I love seeing people grow. And a lot of you send me pictures of the team when you're done holding the book and share a paragraph or two about what happened. I just got one recently, and that was awesome. And action today leads to options tomorrow. Action today leads to options tomorrow. Anyone being intentional, growing and developing themselves, are going to have options in the future that they don't have today. Those options can be within the same company. Those options can be in a different company. It doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you one thing. Life is better with more options. That's why you need to develop yourself. That's why you need to be intentional. And I want to tell you, being disciplined, we talked about being disciplined in the last episode, but being disciplined is about making and keeping commitments to yourself and to others. But being intentional is about making and keeping commitments related to specific goals or objectives. So the way I'm talking about it here, the context is slightly different, but the two are very related, being disciplined and being intentional. But in the book, I talked about them slightly different, gave it a different context. But the way I just mentioned that to you, being intentional is about making and keeping commitments related to specific goals or objectives. So as I often do, I would ask you, if you had a choice of having a team member, would you want a team member who's intentional about making and keeping commitments related to specific goals or objectives for the team? Or you want someone who isn't intentional? They may not make or keep commitments related to the goals and objectives. If it happens, it happens, they say. If it don't, it won't. Which one of those two people, if you had a choice to pick, that's all you know about them? One's intentional, one isn't. Which person you want on your team? Which one you want to work with every day? It's obvious. It's common sense, as I always say. You know which person you want to work with, but the most important question is, which one are you? And I just got to say, if you're listening to this podcast, I think you're being intentional, unless someone made you. If you're sitting around a table or you're in a room somewhere and you just have been voluntold to be there, maybe you guys are listening to this podcast, then you're going to talk about it and discuss it. If you're not there because you want to be there, you're probably not being very intentional. But you ought to think about it. I always tell people, mine the gold and dump the dirt. If you're one of those people who were told to listen to this podcast, maybe you don't like me. Maybe you don't like the person who told you. Maybe you don't even like what I'm talking about. If you've got to sit there and listen to it, look for the gold and dump the dirt. The dirt's everything that doesn't mean anything to you. But they might be a crumb of gold in there. There might be a little golden nugget. Look for that. Try to get something valuable out of your time. Be intentional while you're listening to this audio. Be intentional when you read a book. Be intentional when you hear someone speak. Especially if you don't want to be there, or you don't want to hear them speak, or you don't want to read the book, or that sort of thing. That's the most important time to be intentional relative to your growth and development. Because if you're not being intentional, then you're wasting your time. Why would you want to waste your time? Intentional people don't waste their time. So if you kind of get voluntold to do something you don't want to do what high impact players do. Make the best of it. See if there's a nugget in there you can take away, stick it in your pocket. Russell H. Conwell, he said this here. He says, every waking moment of every person contains food for thought. If some live fuller lives every 24 hours than others live in a year, it is because they think faster and higher, wider and deeper. And because the discipline they get from this thought keeps them from wasting their time on trivial or worthless matter. So I'm going to just let it flow this time. One more time. Every waking moment of every person contains food for thought. If some live fuller lives every 24 hours than others live in a year, it is because they think faster and higher, wider and deeper. And because the discipline they get from this thought keeps them from wasting their time on trivial or worthless matter. He's talking about intentional people. High impact players are intentional people. I get people reach out to me sometimes. They want to talk, and I'm happy to talk to people if they're being intentional. I don't want to talk about just random things. And, a lot of people, I reach out to a lot of people through my books, through these podcasts, through my social media posts on LinkedIn. If you don't follow me on LinkedIn, got to get on LinkedIn. If you don't have an account, especially, set yourself up an account, get on there, follow me, follow my wife, Rhea Story. We both have newsletters. By the way, Rhea has a new newsletter on LinkedIn, The Ladder of Influence. And I haven't told you about that. She just started it. But if you are on LinkedIn, make sure you go find her profile and subscribe to her newsletter. You can be intentional that way. But I want to mention to you, when leaders become intentional about a new initiative, such as leadership development, something happens. I call it the Great Divide. The Great Divide happens. The overall team divides into two teams. And there was already a divide. But when a leader decides, hey, I'm going to become intentional about leadership development. I'm going to become intentional about workforce development. I'm going to become intentional about cultural transformation. See, as I've talked about before, every person on a team, from the newest entry-level team member to the most senior team member, the top boss, the top leader, every person is on a team. When I'm talking about team players, I'm talking about everybody in the organization. So when you got a high-impact team player who is also a high-impact team leader at the top, they decide to get serious about what I'm always talking about. The Great Divide happens. The positive high-impact players who support the leader's vision and mission, and the negative low-impact players who are going to resist everything the high-impact players choose to do in order to move the organization in the right direction. That's the teams you're going to have. You're going to have the Great Divide. There's going to be folks who are high-impact players. They're going to support the leader. They're going to get on board. They're going to be part of what I call the tip of the spear. And then there's going to be all the negative folks on the other side. The people in the organization are on one side or the other. Some are vocal about it. Some are quiet about it. But everybody in that organization is on one side of that divide. Obviously, the leader's goal is to try to get as many people on the positive side as possible. But this is tough. This is a tough thing to do when we talk about being intentional about cultural transformation. When we talk about all the high impact players at every level, again, they could be entry level players, they could be in any department inside of any organization, but I'm talking about the people who are being intentional about cultural transformation, about personal growth, personal development, leadership development, workforce development, all of these things. The folks who are not the top leader, they're going to be wishing the top leader would hurry up and do something about all these negative people. And it's a tough situation to be in because that top leader is being intentional about cultural transformation. But they're also trying to be patient and give some of those negative people time to be impacted by the positive people. Because a lot of those negative people have a lot of competency. They have a lot of years of experience quite often. They're valuable to the team. You don't just want to throw those people away. But what happens a lot of times is some of the folks on the positive side of the divide, they get tired of waiting. So they go turn in their notice, go get them a job somewhere else. Most often, it's a job somewhere else where nothing like cultural transformation or leadership development is taking place. They go in there, they hear the spiel, they think it's all nice, it's all awesome, a great organization until they get in there, and then they figure out somebody pull the rug over them, told them some stuff. You see, people problems are going to happen everywhere you go. But if you're someplace or you go someplace where there's no leadership development, there's no cultural transformation, there's nothing happening, where they don't have the great divide, they just have a divide. If you go somewhere like that, you don't even have any hope for the place to intentionally get better. All you can do is you could remain intentional and try again someplace else. But I'm just sharing that with you because leaders who are intentional, high impact players in high level leadership positions, they have a lot of weight on their shoulders when it comes to cultural transformation. They wish the negative people would get on board or leave, and they hope the positive people stay on board and also remain in the company. It's tough. It's why a lot of people give up. If you're part of a team like that, don't give up. If you're one of the high impact players, you do have options. You can stay and help the team who's being positive, who's being intentional. You can stay and help them transform the organization, knowing you have a long way to go. Or you can go someplace else. Maybe you'll find a place that's actually has been doing the type things I talk about for a long time. Odds of that are low, but they are out there. But you better be careful, and you better be interviewing the people who are interviewing you. You better be asking some really good questions about leadership and culture, or you'll end up in a much worse place. Because I'm going to tell you what, anywhere you go, there's people. There's going to be problems between people. That's just the way we work. We don't get along so well a lot of times. A lot of us have too much pride and ego. So I want to tell you something from that John Maxwell says, and he was absolutely on the mark when he said this. He says a well-intentioned person with no leadership knowledge and experience cannot train another person to lead. You would not believe how many people, and I'm talking about top-level leaders across this country, expect those people on the org chart who are in formal authority leadership positions to teach other people how to lead, and they don't even know how to lead themselves. You may work in an organization like that, where leaders higher up the org chart, those who are promoting others and giving them their first leadership position, or either promoting them from one level of leadership up to a higher level of leadership, or these leaders are hiring outside people, bringing them into the organization, giving them a leadership position, and they don't even train them on leadership. No matter what the scenario is, one of those I just described, or something different even. But you got leaders who don't have any leadership knowledge, expected to train and develop people how to lead. But you got leaders who know. This is one of the worst offenses a formal authority leader can make. When they're in cultural transformation, everybody is watching them. The top level leader, whoever's leading this cultural transformation in an organization. And Rhea and I support a lot of leaders all over the country who are doing that. So if you're one of them and you think I'm talking to you, then I am. But I'm talking to a bunch of you. It's not one of you. There's a lot of you out there. And there's some of you out there that I've never even met that have found my content. That's why you listen to this podcast. You found my books. You may not have ever met me. You may not have ever talked to me, because I do meet you eventually, usually some point in the future I'll meet you. So that's how I know you're out there, because I've met people like you in the past. So you know I don't even know you personally, but it may still feel like I'm talking to you. But one of the worst offenses a leader can do while they're under that magnifying glass or that microscope, while they're leading cultural transformation, while they're standing on top of the mountain telling everybody who we're going to become, where we're going to go, and then they shoot themselves in the foot by doing the exact opposite thing that they're telling everybody they're going to do. They keep doing the same old stuff that's been happening for years in the past. Political stuff. People getting put in positions that ought not be put in positions. I have no idea why that happened, but it happens. I've seen organizations, an opening comes up, and they put a wrong person in there. I see leaders sometimes, we talk about the Great Divide. I see leaders put people who are on the negative side of the Great Divide into a leadership position. You don't have to have a high degree of education to figure out that's a bad idea. But people do it. Then they justify it. They justify it to themselves and to their team. But this is what I'm going to tell you right here. High impact players, once they start seeing that happen, they ain't going to stick around long. Unless they want to help you. Then they're wishing you would help yourself. Quit making such silly decisions. But I can tell you what I'm talking about right now. It'll rub some leaders wrong. They'll say, well, you don't know what I'm going through. Maybe I don't, but I know what you're going to keep going through if you keep making those kind of decisions. More of the same, but actually it's going to get worse, because it is super hard to generate momentum for cultural transformation. When you talk about a top leader being intentional, it's super hard to generate that momentum to cause that great divide. But when you cause that great divide, people are watching. You're under a microscope. You're under a magnifying glass. It's hard to create that momentum, but it ain't hard to lose it. And that's where this stuff is tough. Cultural transformation is tough. Being a high impact player, reporting to a high impact leader who maybe is not there yet because they're learning and growing just like you. That's usually what happens. A lot of times, somebody at some level will dive into some content, maybe my content, maybe someone else's content, And then somebody there, they end up being able to influence each other, and eventually they get a movement going. And the thing is, everybody's learning together. So you have to communicate that to each other. We're all learning together. Doesn't matter what level you're at on the org chart. If you're in the entry level, you may be learning this stuff and you may be gung-ho and you're going to make some dumb decisions. I'm just going to tell you. Or you may be in first line supervision and you ain't ever heard this stuff, but you get gung-ho about it and you start reading. You're going to make some dumb decisions. I'm going to go on and tell you. You may be the CEO or the top leader or the business owner. You get into this stuff and you're going to make some dumb decisions. The reason is because you're human. But it's also primarily because you're learning. You're going to see things different down the road. That's why a lot of times the things I say to some people who are getting into this, they don't agree with me. They can't see. They're 10 miles back. I'm trying to tell them what's 10 miles ahead, and they can't see it, so they don't believe it's there. They don't trust me enough yet. They haven't seen enough. They haven't experienced enough. And if they don't grow enough, they're never going to see it. They'll die thinking I was wrong. Because they quit at mile 2, so they never got to see what was at mile 10. Or they quit halfway up the mountain. I guarantee you can understand this. The view from halfway up the mountain is not the same view you get when you're on top of the mountain. And I'm not saying I'm on top of the mountain. I'm always growing. But relatively speaking, where I am at, if I consider where I'm at the top of the mountain, there's a whole lot of people have not even started climbing the mountain. There's people at all different levels. But see, when you get to the top of the mountain, you think you're at the top of the mountain, you look around, you figure out, oh, there's a mountain over there taller than the one I'm on. In other words, you got to keep going. You got to keep growing. You don't ever get there. It's a constant, continuous growth. But you got to be intentional. My friend and mentor, Jimmy Collins, former Chick-fil-A president and COO, he had this to say. He says, I will never have all of the answers, but that will not stop me. I will go with what I have. He's talking about being intentional. He's talking about making things happen. And Jimmy started a newsletter on LinkedIn recently, and he puts out some great content. He's an amazing storyteller. And if you don't know Jimmy, be sure to go back. I went over to his home in 2019, recorded 3 podcasts with him, a 3-part podcast series. Episode 119, 121, and 123. You can go back, scroll through this 300-something episodes, go to 119, 121, 123, and you can hear Jimmy, some of his stories. I promise you will mine some gold from those 3 episodes. He's got a book called Creative Followership, In the Shadow of Greatness. And he talks about how he followed Truett for 33 years almost. He was Truett's 3rd staff employee. But Jimmy was very intentional about being a high impact follower. See, the only way you can be a high impact follower, though, is you have to be a high impact leader of yourself. But you also have to be a high impact team player as you work with others. So in 1967-68, when Truett Cathy hired Jimmy as his 3rd staff employee, and then Jimmy retired in 2001 when they reached $1 billion with a B in sales together. They accomplished a lot. Truett Cathy and Jimmy Collins built Chick-fil-A from the ground up. They were very intentional, high-impact team players. They built a massive team of high-impact players. It's still out there. Truett passed away, I think, in 2012, so 10 or 11 years. They're slipping a little bit. I can tell you that. That's what happened. The leader who built that organization passed away. Other folks are doing well trying to sustain the momentum, but they're not Truett Cathy. Most likely there will be no one who ever leads Chick-fil-A after Truett Cathy led Chick-fil-A who could have actually built Chick-fil-A from startup like Truett did, because they're not Truett. Doesn't mean they're bad people. They're really good people. And he created a lot of momentum during his life. But if they're like most organizations, and I can already see the cracks, and if you're a Chick-fil-A fan like I am, if you like their food, just start watching. And you may have noticed already there's some things, they're slipping. So, when it comes to being intentional, besides this podcast, what are you doing? Which side of the divide, if there's a cultural transformation going on in your organization, which side of the divide are you on? I already know. If you listen to my podcast, you on the positive side. Unless, again, someone made you listen. That's why I was asking the question. Which side are you on? Because I know sometimes people are voluntold to listen. But if you want to be a game changer, you got to be a high impact player. You got to be intentional. You got to be disciplined. And for me, when I was on a team, I was always very intentional about my work, what I was doing, how I did it. That's why I was highly productive, because I was very intentional about my work. But I was not intentional about being a high impact team player relative to the rest of the team. In the big picture, relative to the entire organization, I was thinking I was being a high impact team player because I was performing well by myself. I didn't perform well at all with others because there was always internal competition I had. So for a lot of years, in my early years, I didn't necessarily want to help people, because it's a lot easier to outperform people who don't perform well if you don't teach them how to perform well. And so I didn't understand the big picture. I had a scarcity mindset. I was trying to make it all about me so I would look good. And all they were doing was not a very good job, which was helping me look even better. But I didn't realize I could have looked even better to my leaders if I could have helped everyone else, if I would have built relationships and then helped them perform well, give those people lots of tips. And I eventually did start doing that. I mean, I became a setup person who I had to learn to operate 70 machines in the plant. And so it gave me the platform to go help everybody. Just by getting that position, it changed my mindset, because I wasn't just working on a machine by myself anymore. Basically, my goal was to help everybody in the plant be more productive. During setups, when they have to set up multiple machines, I would help them. So while I'm setting up one machine, they setting up another, but I'm also giving them tips. And because I'm working with a bunch of people, I'm learning myself. I'm learning from a lot of people. So I'm getting accelerated growth because I'm learning from so many different people all around at that time at that plant. But then I was taking my knowledge and sharing it with everyone else. And it's just the way it happened to work out, the jobs that I have and the understanding I had. But I had nobody teaching me this stuff. We didn't do any book studies. Nobody ever told me there was a book. 20 years working in manufacturing. Nobody ever told me there was an industry. Nobody ever talked to me about personal growth. No leader was ever intentional about sharing this type of information with me. I only know of one of them who actually knew about this type of content. I'm sure there were others, but I don't know for a fact who they were, but there had to be some. But I only know of one. And he never even mentioned this content until I had moved on, left him behind, and started doing what I'm doing now. And then that person started talking to me about the books he had read. And I'm thinking, why didn't you ever tell me about this when I reported to you? Why didn't you ever tell all of us in the plant? So I hope you got some thoughts today, some thought-provoking content. Hope you have maybe raised your awareness a little bit. I don't know what area that might be. But I'm going to leave it with you for today. Be intentional. Talk to you next time.
Make it happen or someone else will. It might as well be you. Are you serious about taking your career and your life to the next level and beyond? Check out Mac Story's Blue Collar Leadership series books and others, now available on audio, along with paperback and ebooks at Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. Please visit bluecollarleadership.com to learn about Mac's books, programs, special offers, certifications, and more. Thank you for listening to the Blue Collar Leadership Podcast.